webinar series theme, is something that it's really kind of looking at the positives of where we are and where we're going forward this year. So we all know there's still some issues within the industry that we'll try not to just keep beating that drum about, employees and supply chain issues and whatever. But it's like the whole thought is we're moving forward. Let's look at where we're going, what we're doing, what consumers are looking for, and how we can really think about moving businesses forward to appeal to consumers' changing demand, because it's constantly changing. I mean, the economy is changing as well, and so things are quite different. And because of that, we need to look at things in a positive light and say, what can we do to make sure that we're taking care of them? So again, the theme is back to the future, looking at next generation new menu trends. So that being said, I mean, I'll do the other introductions of everybody after Jack's talk.
I didn't want to get into super specific flavor trends in particular because there's so many of them, but I wanted to maybe just give us a little framework for thinking about how we can engage with customers. And I apologize to any of you that have seen any of this from Datassential before, but I think it's just a really interesting psychological thing that tells us a lot about how consumers engage with preference. So we have a system called Flavor, which basically Datassential has a system called Flavor, which basically looks at everything you eat, drink, every food, beverage, ingredient, flavor, you name it, anything you can basically put in your mouth. And it shows, do people love it? Do they like it? Do they hate it? Have they tried it before? And we learn a lot when we sort of study the metadata from this. So if you look at something like prickly pear, for instance, we know it's on almost 3% of menus. 60% of consumers have heard of it. 26% have tried it. 2% have had it multiple times in the last month. 6% love it. 11% like it, etc. Now imagine knowing this for everything, not just prickly pear, but thousands of different foods, flavors, ingredients, and being able to cut that by geography, generation, customers of a particular brand, customers of your own chain, for instance. And we did a lot of that analysis at this sort of big meta level. And we started learning some interesting things. And I want to maybe just showcase a couple of the things that we've learned today to maybe get the engines turning and the wheels turning in our minds as we think about what it means to engage with foods and flavors. So, again, prickly pear, here are the key numbers. 60% know it, 26% have tried it, 2% have had it multiple times, or you can see how many love it, how many like it, etc. So what we did is I've plotted over here 2 axes. Each one of these little green dots is a different flavor, right? So, not a food item, but a flavor of some sort. And the 2 axes are the percentage of people who know it, going from left to right along the bottom there, and the percentage of people that have actually tried it, going from bottom to top along the left there. Now, if you think about it, if you've tried something, you have to sort of know what it is, right? So the know it number could never be above, the tried it number can never be above the know it number. But that perfect one-to-one relationship between knowing something and trying something is represented by this diagonal gray line over here. Like if you fell on this line, that would mean that everyone who knows something has actually gone on to actually try it. And what you start seeing is how far things veer off that gray line, right? All these dots are not perfectly clustered along that line. There's a little bit of gap between that perfect relation between knowing and trying something and where different flavors actually are today. So we can look at this for things like flavors. As a couple of examples, there's that prickly pear that we saw. A lot of people know it, not nearly as many people have tried it. Lavender is an example. A lot of people know it's a flavor, not nearly as many people have tried it. So in the case of lavender, it looks like almost 70% of people know what it is as a flavor, but only about half that number have actually gone on to try it. So how do you sort of close that gap? And we see this with every category, right? Foods and dishes. Look at something like turducken, which is sort of a funny example. Over 40% of people have heard of turducken. Only about 10% have actually tried it. Again, there's a pretty big distance between this perfect one-to-one gray diagonal line and all of these other dots, which represent different types of foods and dishes. Or if we look at the case of global foods, for instance, I mean, you can actually see some of these things which seem like they should be pretty well known to us, right? So sushi and tofu, for instance. I mean, there's even a pretty large gap for sushi. 90% of people have heard of sushi, but only about a little less than 60% have actually tried it. Or tofu, right? 80% of people have heard of tofu. Only about half that number have actually tried it. There's a pretty big distance between it and that gray line again. So I want to use that as a prelude into something really interesting. And for those of you, maybe you've seen us present this piece before, but I think it's just utterly fascinating. You might be asking, what the heck is this thing that you see on the screen right now? And I'll tell you, In 1967, was conducted perhaps one of the most interesting experiments that I think really tells us a lot about our own lives and how we live and how we, and how we engage with the world and what we think we like. But it also has a lot of direct relevance to food. So it was at Oregon State University, 1967, and it was a speech communications class. I think it was speech 115, some undergraduate speech course. And on the first day of class, all the students come into the class, just as they normally would, but also walking into the class is this person here, barefooted, wearing nothing but a black sack. Can't see their face, can't see any identifying features, just a black sack and bare feet, and said nothing. Now, this student that's inside this black sack did clear this with the professor ahead of time, so the professor wouldn't get mad and call the police or something, because he wanted to see this experiment play out as well. And what the black sack did was it just sat there, class after class after class after class, to see what type of reactions you would get from other students. Right? Imagine if in this webinar, one of the pretty faces on screen right now were just replaced by a black sack that said or did nothing. You'd be really, really quite confused. And the question is, what happened over a period of time? And this article sums it up really well. I'm just going to read this verbatim for us. So black bag initially was socially rejected by the rest of the class, which made sense because it's not normal to have someone in a black sack sit at the back of your lectures. Black bag was a subject of ridicule and ostracized, destined to be a lonely student with zero friends. But if black bag minded, it never showed. As the term progressed, the students' views about black bag changed. Hostility turned to curiosity, then it shifted into sort of distant fondness. By the end of the course, the classroom's overall feeling had morphed into something that could be loosely termed as friendship. Black bag had become part of the furniture, one of the gang. Everyone had gotten used to black bag for no other reason than because they were there. And what we see over here is what was something treated with hostility at the beginning, but ended up becoming everyone's friend. There was even an anecdote where one person, that hadn't befriended black bag yet. Keep in mind, black bag never said anything, but poking at him with an umbrella, and two other students came to black bag's defense and smacked the guy that tried to prod at him. He became their friend simply by being there. And this is a great example of what's known in psychology as the mere exposure effect, which says that by simply being exposed to something, you begin to like it more. I think we see this in many domains of our own personal lives too. So you can imagine back when we had radios, imagine you turn on the radio, you hear a new song for the first time, and you're like, yeah, that song sort of sucks. You don't like it. But by the time you hear it for the 20th time, you're like singing along to that song on the radio, right? You didn't like it at the beginning, but just hearing it over and over and over again made you start to like it. I think this holds true for many other things as well. And the idea is simple. As exposure to something goes up, preference for something goes up. We've seen this in many, many areas and aspects of life. And this is the experiment that's repeated and successfully multiple times. So Patricia Pliner is a psychologist, food psychologist, did this important study almost 40 years ago, the effects of mere exposure on the liking for edible substances. And what she did is she took, this is back before people knew what a mango or papaya was. I mean, that stuff is pretty common these days, but you go back 40 years, it was foreign to just about everybody. They recruited a bunch of subjects that didn't know anything about tropical fruits, right? Never tried any of these things. And they put them all into different groups, and they give some of the subjects, they would give them different tropical fruits and try them 20 times. Then some would try it 10 times, and someone tried 5 times, and someone tried them 0 times. And then they would ask those subjects to try that fruit juice again, and they would be asked how much they actually liked it. And the ones that had tried it more times previously liked those juices a lot more. If you never tried it before, and then you tried for the first time, you're like, yeah, I don't like it so much. But if you were given it 20 times, right, same type of people, same demographics, same background, and everything, the mere fact that they've had multiple exposures in the past increased their preference for that item. I actually think this is probably true of people too. I mean, I shouldn't say this. Imagine you meet someone, you're like, that guy sucks, I don't like that guy. But then after you meet, you get with them for a few times, like, oh, this guy's my friend now. It just happens in many aspects of life, including food. So again, as exposure goes up, preference goes up. So I'm going to go back to that know versus try chart that we looked at before, but instead of showing you just one category like flavor at a time, I'm going to show you the totality of 4,000 different things that we track in our flavor system. Here's that know versus try, and you see this sort of bowed, sort of arcing, pattern over here where things can get quite distant from that perfect one-to-one line. But what if we looked at a different chart instead? Instead of plotting the percentage of people who know something and the percentage of people that have actually gone on to try it, what if we look at the percentage of people that have tried something versus the percentage of people who like that something? That's what this chart is instead. You can see the shape becomes a little bit different. The distance from that diagonal gray line gets quite a bit smaller, and we'll repeat that. So here's know versus try, and here's try versus like, which is much, much tighter. And I think what you're seeing play out in the world of food is the mere exposure effect at work. It's hard to get someone to try something for the first time, but once you get them to try it, they end up starting to like that thing pretty much. And if you look at the outliers for stuff that they've tried that they say they don't really like, it tends to be stuff that we've taught them is just bad. Look at these 3 dots over here. These like really far off that gray line, right? These are things that people have tried, but say they don't like very much. It's like food coloring, MSG, GMOs, things that we've objectively told consumers are bad. So you almost have to look at these as not just outliers, but things that should be disqualified from the analysis. So what does this mean? Well, I think this introduces something we like to call the LTO paradox, because the hard part is getting someone to try something for the first time. That very first bite, the very first experience with a flavor, a food, a trend, that is 90% of the work. And with an LTO, what do? We introduce something brand new to the menu. We do all the marketing and promotion and all the other great stuff that we do to get them to actually try that new thing. And then we take the thing away. We did all the hard work in boxes number 1 and 2, and we didn't really reap the long-term reward because we just banished that thing from the menu. Now, that's not to say that every new introduction we bring to the menu has to be permanent, right? That wouldn't be great either. And it doesn't mean we want to slow down our rate of LTOs, because we do want innovation. But I feel like if we bring a new flavor or something onto a menu via an LTO, perhaps that flavor should still exist as a remnant on the menu in some other dishes as well, or maybe continue on into the next month's LTO. We did the hard work of getting the consumer to try something for the first time. And a lot of things that we talked about as trends that we're like, oh my God, gochujang, we've been talking about that thing for, 8 years now. Majority of consumers still haven't even tried it, right? And we just saw with sushi, the numbers weren't even that high for trial. So when you get someone to try something, we have to find a way to take the thing that's new about that and not take it away completely. Perhaps it continues on into the next offering or somewhere else on the menu, especially if it's a sauce or a flavor or something that could be easily adapted to other dishes as well. The question is, how do you encourage trial? And that's what I want to focus on right now, because that really is the hard part of the equation. This is pretty simple. I think you all know this instinctively, and you may actually even all know this, as a matter of data fact as well. But typically the best way to get someone to try a dish, something that's new, is you want the name to be familiar and you want the description to be unique. If you have a name that is too wacky or crazy where people don't know what that item is anymore, it becomes an unbuyable product because it just scares people away. But if you have a description that is so bland and just like everything else, yeah, it might be a good seller, but it's no longer a differentiator for you. So if you have a new unique flavor you bring into a dish, I would tend to feature that more in the description if possible. Of course, it depends on exactly what it is and the context, but you can't have too wacky of a name. So I'll give you an example. You look at furikake, which is Japanese seasoning. It's up 51% on menus over the past few years. It's fantastic. And you look at, let's say, this really cool restaurant in New York City, Mock Bar, which has their fries, and they call them K-Town fries in this case. Crispy shoestrings topped with kimchi, house-made gochujang, aioli, bulgogi mayo, scallion, and furikake. Looks awesome, right? Note that they didn't call them furikake fries or bulgogi fries or gochujang fries or something like that, because that would scare people away. They would be like, what the hell is that? I don't know what that word is. That scares me. But I get K-Town. Maybe I like K-pop, whatever. I get that concept. And we tucked all the interesting stuff into the description instead, as opposed to in the name. And there's a rational basis for this from a data perspective, right? You look at something like furikake, for instance, across the hundreds of the millions of menu items that we track. Oh, sorry, there's a little bit of a typo over here. 12% of the time furikake appears in the name, and about 88% of the time, 87% of the time, it appears in the description. Disregard that 21.6. That should say 87.1. But you get the idea. And I think this is what we've seen sometimes, especially with testing of new items from chains like many of yours, which is there's a new idea, and oftentimes the unique thing in testing leaks into the name of the item. And our counsel is always, that's great. It's fantastic. We have something interesting, new, and unique. We're 100% for that. But if it's something people haven't heard of, you really want to put that in the description and come up with a more creative way to express the flavor profile in the name, but in a way that people have actually heard of before. As soon as they feel like they don't know what the item is anymore, it is instantly off many consumers' consideration sets. Because what we want to promote is safe experimentation, right? Where you're experimenting as a consumer, but it feels safe to you. What you don't want is experimental safety, where you're like a crash test dummy and you have no idea what's about to happen in your mouth. And the principle we've always talked about in the past that we think is such a good example of this is something called fusibiquity. Take a ubiquitous item, French, fries in that case, or a pizza, or a flatbread, or a burger, or a fried chicken sandwich, and infuse that with something that makes it interesting. But if it's a flavor profile, that's the thing that's going to make it interesting, and it's a flavor people haven't heard of before, you have to come up with a way to describe that in the name of the dish that's not going to scare people away. I think a really good example is, many, many years ago when banh mi sandwiches were just becoming a trend, we actually saw some chains do, banh mi sandwiches. And you saw some chains have very, very similar items, but they describe them differently. One chain released an item that they actually called a banh mi, which scored, sort of poorly because a lot of consumers didn't know what that was. Another one called it, I think, a Saigon chicken sandwich, and described what a banh mi is in the description, and it scored much, much higher because we didn't scare the consumer away with words they just don't quite understand, at least not in the name of the item. In the description, you could do that though. And the notion of fusibiquity is what turns a fried chicken sandwich into a, amazing Korean fried chicken sandwich. Right, look, this thing has got like what looks like some kimchi on here. Maybe it's got, I don't know, Kewpie mayo or some other gochujang, some stuff that maybe a lot of consumers aren't familiar with. But because it's a chicken sandwich, people are like, yeah, I love chicken sandwiches. You've modified it a little bit. I want to try this. It's not scary to me, right? Instead of just regular chicken wings, it's Asian chicken wings. Who cares what the sauce is, right? Put that in the description. The notion of it being an Asian chicken wing as opposed to an esoteric sauce that many consumers haven't heard of in the name is what makes it appealing. And the other thing that I think we should really think about is we used to get asked all the time, what are the big trends today on menus, or what are the big flavor trends? And that's usually followed with the request of, let's not talk about any fads. Let's only talk about trends. I think that used to be a valid question, that you want fads, you want trends, you don't want fads, because fads are short term and they're not sustainable. I think it's no longer that valid of a question. Because we live in a world now where fads are no longer just fads. You could really start thinking of them as micro trends. We've seen just such a rapid acceleration of people's preferences and willingness to try things. And I think many of your businesses are more capable than ever of hyper targeting your menu offerings, whether it's by consumer type or maybe something's just a social media play, what have you. There's a lot of crazy shit out there on social media, and we can talk about those as inspirations that maybe seem like a fad, but we should think of them as micro trends, and many of them are actually worth trying to adapt in some way, and we can look at some examples of this. Elote is something that we think probably actually does have some legs, but really started taking off more recently because you saw a lot of TikTok activity around it. It's like a super photogenic thing. There's some other things that I think are particularly popular with Gen Z now, which will have some long-term legs, but got a short-term pop because maybe there was, an influencer or something that talked about it. So before we go into some more of those, I want to talk about some other items that we know are particularly popular with the new generation. Oftentimes, they've got exposed to this through social media or some other way. Elote and butter chicken are some examples. Acai bowls certainly are an example. Korean corn dogs are certainly an example too. Have you all tried this? Have you got actually, Kevin, I think in Orlando you have a mochi nut somewhere in Orlando, don't you?
Yeah, it just opened, right? Yeah.
Yeah, that place is awesome. There's usually a line out the door, and it's fantastic. And
Have you gone to Barrio Dog in San Diego?
No,
It's the same kind of thing. This guy, when I was told that we did our GCIA event there in October, and everybody kept saying, you got to go to Barrio Dog, got to go. And, my original thought, like you're saying, is like, it's a hot dog place. Come on. I mean, how good can it be? I mean, it blew all of us away. It was so amazing, the whole story behind it, but the flavors he did were just insane.
Yeah, I mean, look, and the fact that it was a hot dog made it very, very approachable. Right. And that made it a safe thing to go. It's a hot dog at the end of the day. I mean, this thing is a corn dog at the end of the day. I mean, someone said, hey, do you want, and they just described this coating. I'm like, I don't want that shit. But if it's on a hot dog, I'm like, yeah, how bad could it possibly be? But it ends up being quite delicious in a lot of cases. So, I say this because there's a really interesting chart, and we've shown this before, and I think it's one of the most interesting ones, which is if you're going to try something new to eat for the very first time, is it going to be because you're pretty darn sure it's going to taste good? Or are you willing to try something new to eat just because it's new? Will you try something new for new's sake? And you can see how this is different by generation. If you're a boomer, you want an assurance that it's going to taste good. If you're a Gen Zer, you might eat something just because it's new, wacky, and crazy, even if you have no idea if it's going to taste good. And guess what? There's one side of this chart in terms of generations where they're going to get more prominent, and there's going to be one side of this chart where those people are, it's going to start vanishing from our population just by natural science. And I think you see this pretty clearly right now in terms of consumer attitudes. There's a lot of stuff right now is social media driven, and it's just try something new because it's new, and some of the stuff really sticks. So it's hard to talk about this without talking about all the crazy crap you see on TikTok, which has often birthed a lot of interesting food trends. I will say, seems more and more likely that TikTok is going to be no longer with us, perhaps sometime as early as this year. I personally think that Chinese spy balloon thing is probably going to put pressure on Congress to just cancel TikTok in the coming months. So we'll see if that actually comes to happen. But before that does, we would be remiss to not review some of the things that have debuted on TikTok that have actually made their way into restaurants, just as a small smattering of examples of things to think of as micro trends. And there's thousands of these, right? You look at burrito tacos, for instance, which to many of us that are like on the side of food, are like, oh yeah, for sure, that's a food trend. This thing was birthed by TikTok. I mean, sure, burrito tacos have been around before, but it got going because of TikTok. And do we have anyone from El Pollo Loco on by chance?
I don't think we do on this one today, but they're definitely involved in our organization and coming to our upcoming events.
Yeah, so look, burrito's up, almost double on menus. It got going because of TikTok, and I was on a presentation with, I think it was El Pollo Loco's CMO. I hope I got his title right. And he said, yeah, we did a burrito LTO, and it was our most successful LTO of all time, right? Don't think of these as fads. Think of these as micro trends, and if you can hyper target them somehow, they could be incredibly successful. Or like the corn rib. This is an interesting story. I was in Atlanta to give a presentation, and I had like 2 hours before my presentation. So I go to my favorite Persian restaurant out there, a place called Rumi's in Midtown. And it's like an authentic Persian restaurant, a little more high end, but they serve like an authentic Persian menu, but they had corn ribs on their menu too. A full-blown TikTok item they adapted onto their menu. Now, I'll tell you the really interesting part of this that has nothing to do with anything. All of a sudden, the front door slams shut to the restaurant, and I hear people start yelling, active shooter, active shooter, active shooter. And there was a full active shooter scene going on. They barricaded us in the restaurant, forbid us to leave. There are about 40 cop cars right outside the front door. And I'm like, oh crap, I have a presentation I'm supposed to give in about 40 minutes. What am I going to do? I have to say that sometimes the cops, it's almost like Keystone Cops, because there's probably like 10 officers in front. They're all turned the other way, and I was able to sneak out and tiptoe around them undetected and make it to the presentation. And I feel like I never got the kudos I should for having broken the law to give a talk on food trends. But
That's
there
awesome.
we go. So there's corn ribs. Butter boards, of course, we've seen this. I think we've actually seen some restaurants do some prettified version of it. Have you all seen this cloud bread? It's like bread made from eggs. I think it's probably too expensive to make this these days. Maybe when egg prices come back down, it'll be a thing again. But all this stuff seems crazy and stupid and dumb, just like the Korean corn dog. But don't dismiss them as that. Like maybe some of these don't make sense for you. Some of them might, but there's thousands more out there to dig around with. The biggest actual trend is that there is no longer one single large trend. There's thousands of micro trends out there, and it's up to all of us to pick the ones that make sense for our brand and adapt them. And I think that's actually good for the world too, because sometimes a lot of chains will often just sort of follow each other, right? Someone has success with one flavor, a competitor will say, oh, okay, we got to do something with that flavor too. I mean, that's probably why sriracha took off so darn fast, for instance. But that means you end up giving the same options to consumers just under a different brand name. That's not great. Like we know from what we saw earlier that when someone just tries something multiple times, they start to like it more. So let's give them more things to try multiple times that maybe they can uniquely associate with your own specific brand that locks them in as a customer for the long term. Now, I will say, while we think a lot of the TikTok stuff is great, this is by no means a blanket endorsement of everything on TikTok, because there's some really, really, really terrible crap out there. This one's pretty good though, like the spaghetti pancake or the pancake pasta stuff, right? Made from actual pancakes. So here's your breakfast. I think that's sort of cool. But this is terrible. Y'all remember this thing? The NyQuil chicken, where you marinate your chicken in
No,
cough
never
syrup.
saw that.
Yeah, you marinate your chicken in NyQuil or whatever cough syrup you tend to have, and then you cook it in that too. It turns into this really sickly greenish blue color. It's really quite disgusting. And it actually prompted the FDA to put out a press release saying, do not do this. It will kill you. Because what happens is when you heat medication up or chemicals up past a certain point, they can become toxic and literally kill you. They said the fumes alone could actually kill you as well. But this is one of the many things that trended on TikTok. So please do not regard anything I said as a blanket endorsement of try everything TikTok has out there. There is some really, really horrible stuff too, but there's some really interesting stuff as well. We've basically crowdsourced food trends with TikTok. You got millions of people at home trying all sorts of wacky stuff, and some of it gets a little bit of a viral lift. And maybe you don't do it exactly that way, but why not let them be your crowdsource for inspiration, at least in part, right, of your overall innovation program? Take advantage of it. Don't look at it as just a fad that's going to pass. Think of it as perhaps a micro trend that you could do something with. So with that, I think I went a little bit over, but I'll turn it back to Kevin and the gang. Thanks so much for the chance to present.
Oh, thanks, Jack. That's amazing information. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. So right now we're going to introduce, again, this is kind of different from what we've done in the past. But what we wanted to do to kick off this new series is to actually bring in a lot of our board members from ICCA and GCIA and members as well to just kind of chime in on, what we just learned, but also some of the things that everybody's looking at down the road. So again, the theme of this is for us it's back to the future, looking at next generation new menu trends. So we want to look at, okay, what positive things are we looking to do this year to get away from some of the negativity that we've had to deal with for the past couple of years. So we've got Melanie Oxer, who's a VP of Cookievation, one of my favorite titles ever, for Insomnia Cookies. We have Ian Ramirez. Ian's the Director of Culinary Innovation for Creative Dining Services, non-commercial company in a variety of different types of businesses. They're based out of Michigan. Keith Burnell, you guys all know. Keith is Director of Food and Beverage at Nordstrom Restaurant Division. Jeff Sanelli, who you all know as well, takes me 20 minutes to get all the titles he has now, but I don't have to because all the logos of the companies are right behind him, which thank you very much, Jeff. So we all know him as the founder of Which and one of the founding board members of GCIA when we started. Vanessa Marquis, she is one of our newest board members. She's the R&D chef and manager of culinary development for Brass Tap and Beef O'Brady's, based out of the west coast of Florida. Shona Johnson, you guys all know. Shona's been with Chick-fil-A since they were like a little tiny company, which is still quite amazing to me. And then Jason Knoll. Jason is the VP of Culinary for Another Broken Egg. And Tony Dornbush may be in and out a little bit. I knew he was in his car driving around. He's the F&B director for Thunderdome Restaurant Group. They're based out of Ohio and have multiple concepts. I think I covered everybody in there, and Jack's going to stay with us as well. So, I mean, let's start out with, I had some questions I wanted to go kind of generic, like what do you see as menu trends coming up? Why don't we start out with what was the most surprising thing you saw that Jack presented to us just in the last 25 minutes?
Hey, Kevin, Jeff Sinelli. I don't know if you can, everyone hear me? All right.
Yes.
Hey, miss you all, but hey, I got to jump to another call, but I just want to say, hey, Jack, what I caught of it, nice job. I caught the tail end of the cloud bread, and we did an exclusive with the cloud bread company. They built a plant here in Dallas. I found it at a pancake house type restaurant. I think it was Pancake House. And they were menuizing it. I tracked it down. They built the plant, got the exclusive for sandwiches. And when I brought it to my kids, they said, Dad, that was so 2 years ago. It's like my daughters are 10 and 14. And, I learned so much from my own kids. I almost should put them in our R&D department because they're on point. I mean, we'll go out to whether it's Chick-fil-A or, Raising Cane's, and they're showing me the hacks, how to make a sandwich or how to take the mac and cheese and do this with it. And, it's almost what the brands are doing. And then what the kids are doing to the brands is what I'm finding. And, by the time I bring something to a 10 and 14-year-old at the age of 54, I'm 2-3 years behind the curve. So for what it's worth, it's good seeing cloud bread up there, for one of our brands that we tackled. It's a great product. The customers are liking it because it's a vessel for bread made with basically 3 or 4 ingredients: eggs, cream cheese, and baking soda or baking powder. But anyways, nice job, Jack.
Cool. Anybody else have some takeaways from that you thought was pretty amazing?
I remember we were back in Hawaii last October, and there was definitely all of the K-Town or all the dogs that were, dipped in different toppings. And that was like, at the mall over in Hawaii, it is a huge mall, and their whole, place of where to eat, the little food court is huge. And that was probably one of the biggest lines I've seen in a while, besides your normal, Chinese food or, something else, getting a Moco Loco or Loco Moco. But I was really amazed to see how long that line was for those dogs. And those were for locals.
Awesome. Anyone else?
I'll just jump in there real quick. I thought it was really interesting. Well, again, I completely agree, Vanessa. The Korean dogs, it's like I keep hearing about those for the past 2 years, and it's like gaining steam. It's about to plateau, I think, here pretty soon. But that's a pretty cool one. But I thought it was interesting about the naming. Having a unique description and a familiar name. I think that's so interesting because it's something that we struggle with, we do colleges and universities, we do business and industry. And when you're dealing with colleges and universities, you're dealing with a lot of international students and things like that. So when you name stuff, like we like to highlight some, really authentic dishes, right? So they're just authentic dishes from Korea or from wherever they are, but they have very unfamiliar names. And when we do something like that, we're taught to keep it authentic as far as you can't call it the Saigon sandwich, or that's going to be really offensive to somebody if you call it that. So, I guess I don't know if Jack's still on, but I'd love to hear a take on that and to see, the different worlds that we all work in. That's kind of from my world, how we have some challenges with that. So.
And we're in the same boat too. We can't name certain things specifically. We really have to make sure our descriptions, because our clientele, as you see, like for instance, Beef O'Brady's is a totally different clientele than Brass Tap. So we have the comfort food, fried food at Beef O'Brady's, and then you have Brass Tap, which is a little more geared towards millennials who would understand it. But still, there's a lot of people that we really have to break it down for.
Yeah, you know what's interesting on that, to back that up, I wrote a note too when he was talking about that. I thought one of the most interesting things that I had seen in the independent restaurant scene was Manit Chauhan. So she went to Nashville straight from Manhattan, right? And of course, Indian concept, very authentic flavors. And in Nashville, they weren't ready for that. I mean, they had no idea. This is totally foreign. And I think what she did is exactly what he talked about, which is she basically took ingredients they knew. She used pork loin, or she used ribs, or she used some chicken and things, and then kind of just hid, in the description, some of the flavors of things that were in there. And I think it was like, well, hey, I like pork. Yeah, I'll try that. Let me see. Right. And so she didn't give it the authentic names that we all know when you go to a traditional Indian restaurant. She gave it more Americanized comfort, names, and then put in all the flavors that went with it, and has been extremely successful. So anyway, I think that's interesting. Let's kind of move on a little bit, because, everybody kind of heard a lot of that information. Let's talk a little bit about what is your view this year about new menu items. Are you planning on doing more new menu items this year than you did last year? Or the same or less, or what's your feeling on that?
Yeah, so Kevin, at Insomnia Cookies, before COVID hit, we were doing just maybe 4 LTOs a year. Not a big deal. We were spending a lot of time on those maybe 4 big moments throughout the year. Then COVID hit, and it was like all bets were off. It was like we were just throwing everything, at people. Literally in the last 2 years, each year we went from doing 4 to 54 a year. Each of the windows had multiple LTOs and over multiple platforms and things like that. I think we're definitely going to stay at the higher end, I think, because we did see a lot of really good excitement with that. But we may, bring it back a little bit, but we definitely learned a lot about us and our consumer and our brand and what they're looking for. They really liked that we started doing more seasonal. And because we are so focused on college campuses, and that is our big moment of the year, is back to campus, but also Valentine's Day. So those are really our two big seasons. I think we're still going to do, we're not going to go back to 4, but I think we're seeing a lot of positive momentum and interest in the LTOs. Although, Jack made a really great point. You've done all of this work to get those LTOs going, and then you're like, no, just kidding. Maybe it'll be back around another time. But like, we do those windows and we do them really short. But I think, he brought up a really great point about maybe doing a little bit less for a little bit longer, and really just sort of generating more momentum for that. But I do think we're still gonna stick with doing a lot of these. Certainly the kits and things like that were exciting during COVID is probably something we're not going to do anymore. Our shipping's not going to be quite as popular as it was during COVID, but it's all those things that are going to come back around, kind of to where we started, except we're just going to continue, I think, to just try to generate new news and buzz around just some interesting flavors. I mean, we're cookies. It's not really, that's where our innovation, from a menu perspective is our core. But yeah, I think we're still going to stick heavy to it because we saw a lot of really big excitement around that.
That's great. Do you regionalize at all?
We don't, not at all. It is all or nothing. Yeah. We have 236 locations throughout the country, and the menus are the same.
So Kevin, on our side at Nordstrom, we've pivoted, over the past 2 years. We've always focused our LTOs, or what we call our features, on seasonality. But we found over the past 2 years, we've really moved into this diversity, inclusion, and belonging world where we partner with chefs and showcase their food and their flavors. Like for Latinx Heritage Month, we work with Eliana de la Vega. So we were able to showcase her food, but also tell her story and introduce flavors that our customers weren't familiar with. We're working with Chef Christy Brown here in Seattle from the Communion Table for Black History Month, and featuring her flavors and her history of what she brings to the table. And then for Asian American Pacific Islander, we have Danny Bowen from Mission Chinese lined up. So we've spent the past couple of weeks with Danny really working on Korean flavors and kind of fitting, bringing that flavor profile to life through his history and culture. So we're doing it through storytelling. And I think it's become a big thing because I agree, if your LTO is not going to go on the menu, then you find another purpose to kind of bring it to life and drive traffic and sales in those unique ways. In terms of menus, it's kind of funny. I'm lucky because we have a specialty coffee bar, we have bars, and then we have restaurants. And our coffee bar, the younger generation is really into, like, we're now getting ready to launch Thai iced tea and the Vietnamese iced coffee with cardamom and the Mexican cafe de olla, strawberry horchata, a ginger turmeric almond latte. So they're into these drinks that are not only colorful and beautiful, but they strike a different flavor profile and unique in a lot of ways, And then we throw some brown sugar jelly in there and everyone gets happy, or some boba pearls, On the restaurant side with our older customers, it's still about nostalgia. They want nostalgic flavors. They want things that they're familiar with, and they're willing to pay for it. But they are giving you the ability to give it a twist. So you are able to, use a green goddess dressing and create a beautiful grain bowl, because there's some familiarity with the green goddess. So, and then cocktail wise, we're seeing the classics, Vespers, Bloody Marys any which way, which I don't think will ever go out of trend. And then some funner stuff like Jameson cold brews and stuff like that have been cool for us. So, we're seeing comfort nostalgia on the kind of our baby boomers and Gen X, and then more of these new introductions on the younger side. And the younger side, they are willing. That's the perfect generation for these LTOs or for these promotions, because they're the ones who are going to come in and try it. They're going to eat a black and cold pollock on a taco salad in your e-bar. Like, they're the ones eating that, and it's become successful. Now, would they eat it for the next year? Probably not. But they're coming in and they're spending 2 months and buying it.
Awesome. Who else wants to talk to you, like, number of new items or what you're doing that's unique and looking at for this next year?
For us, we kind of slimmed down and trimmed and streamlined over the last couple of years, just with all the fun that we've been having with the supply chains and all that. And I think this year we are kind of cracking the shell and getting back after it like we used to. So we're, everyone is really geared up. We're starting to go down and actually think about new items and new structures and new flavors. Like it's just a different mindset than more than an ingredients or flavors or trends that for us, that we're just going to get back to trying to push the envelope a little bit and try to do some new things and experiment a little bit and not just suck into what's comfortable and easy and familiar.
That's Tony Dornbush, by the way, for those of you that, his video's not on. So yeah, very cool, Tony. Thanks. Yeah. Who else?
I'll jump in. At Chick-fil-A, we're a little behind most of you as far as like LTOs and what we offer. We're kind of slow and steady with our growth, and every once in a while we offer things. But we've been dipping our toe more and more in the water. And the reason that we don't do or haven't done a lot of LTOs is our guests get really mad when we take things away. And we find we can never really take them away. They just want us to custom make them. But they've gotten more used to what we're offering. So you will see an increase in LTO around beverages, also around some salads and some sandwiches this year. And this is work that we had worked on, most of it pre-COVID, and we had to put it all on hold because of supply chain. So we're able to actually introduce some of that this year. And then we're testing we'll be testing an item that you guys will learn about in a couple of weeks, which is for Chick-fil-A World is a little radical, but we're anticipating that test is going to go pretty well. And I have to leave it at that until next week, but just pay attention to your social media next week. I can promise you it's absolutely delicious. I think another thing, just as far as where we are still very much in the throes of supply challenges. So we've had to divert a very large percentage of our team to do nothing but continue to work on supply. And we had one of our guest speakers in a bit ago He said, COVID has left a hangover. We're all going to have to nurse for a while. I don't know about anybody else, but I'm about tired of nursing this hangover because it's giving me a headache, and I want to move back to the fun stuff that we hope to get to. But between the supply challenges and labor and consistency and those types of things, that's where we're having to spend a lot of time with a lot of our efforts right now, but sprinkling in a little bit of fun with LTOs as we go along. And hopefully we'll be able to do some menu refreshes on some items next year.
Awesome. Anybody else?
I'll jump in. So this has been an amazing identity check, what's going on right now, which is a lot of fun. So we're looking at, we're great at Benedicts, we're great at pancakes, we're great at waffles. What we're not great at are some of these really obscure Asian dishes. So kind of pulled back on that and refocused who we were. And I think what's really so cool is I've been reading in the trade magazines, Bennigan's is back, right? Steak and Ale is back. I mean, I have the best memories, I'm sorry, of Steak and Ale, right? And everything you read and everybody here on this call has said it in one way or another, it's nostalgia. Like Steak and Ale is going to come back for what they were. Bennigan's is going to come back for what they were. They're going to be that hot and cool beverage and edgy little, snackatizers. And I really like that the trend is away from discounting. Like you even see Chili's is like decades old programs to discount things. So I think there's so much positive coming out of this. People are getting back to who they are. I mean, Jeff Sinelli, I'm going to give you some props, bro. You've got sandwich shops, and you don't feature a lot of plant-based. So what do you have? You've got your own plant-based concept. Be plant-based at a plant-based. Don't be plant-based at a sandwich shop. So I mean, you said that at our last conference, and I was like, man, that really resonates. I'm going to quit trying to fit this square peg through the round hole. So maybe this is an identity check. What's happening, and it's a positive thing.
Yeah. Hey, Jason, I always I always play what would other brands do as a little game. Like,
Nice.
Shauna would you do a plant-based chicken, at Chick-fil-A, maybe that's what we're being teased about, but it's like, would In-N-Out ever do plant-based meat? Like the great ones, they know that it's not in their DNA. So, that's why one of the reasons why we entered the Earth Burger, acquisition is because it's all DNA. So that's what the customer expects. Everyone else is trying to throw little fishing lures out there to try to catch them, but that's not in their DNA. And sometimes it's, they're fishing in the wrong lakes, ponds, and oceans. So
Jeff, I'm not going to let you off this easy. If you were broken egg, come on, give me a dish.
A broken egg?
Yeah.
You know what? I'd probably have a little crunch in it, a little shell, just to fit the name of the brand. Like every egg has a little shell in it.
So very cool. Hey, let me.
Egg. Somebody's going to start eating shells.
So Jason brought it up. Let me, go around. Let's talk. And we don't have a whole lot of time left. So I'll maybe put them together. I had plant-based as one and vegetarian as another. You think you're going to be growing more into that area? Or are you looking more into it? Do you feel like you have to put plant-based or vegetarian? I won't get into vegan because it's a little more difficult, but you feel like you have to do that. And that's going to be something you will be working on this year?
Kevin, I'll go real quick. We've highly invested in vegetables, more vegetable dishes, more tahini, sesame cauliflower, kung pao Brussels sprouts, roasted carrots with honey and pistachios. And then we've used some of the Kite Hill products and played in that vegan vegetarian world a little bit. It's always going to be at the bottom of your sales mix, but we have it in there to make sure that we can accommodate a lot of our employees eat that way. So for us, it's accommodating our employees. But but when I look at our metrics around Beyond Burger versus regular burger sales, it's 1-2%. You know what I mean? So we're going to invest in vegetables. We're going to invest in healthy eating. We're going to make sure that we make people look and feel good. And that's not about changing, formulations of what we put in people's body.
Anybody else?
I'll jump in. First of all, I'm just super jealous of all of you guys that can just kind of focus on one thing and really just, do what you do really well. Because with us and what we do, we have to be everything to everybody, so we need all the concepts, we need all of the dishes. So it does make it challenging at times. And, when it comes to plant-based, we approach it a little bit differently. Like we've actually made a commitment to have 50% plant-based options on all of our menus by 2025. And what that means, and I think you guys understand this too, but what that means is like, we're not necessarily going to search down every, a plant-based meat analog out there. We are going to do just like what Keith is saying, go into more vegetables and more real foods and things like that. There is some great plant-based analogs out there, and I think they're getting better, but they're definitely trending downwards also. But our strategy all around having 50% plant-based options is to be able to serve the food in a different manner, where you're actually serving the meat separately. So anywhere you go, at any station you have, there's going to be plant-based options or vegetarian or vegan options there, and that's going to be purely by just keeping the meat separate, so, and they can still have the meat if they want it with it, but you're just serving it differently. So it really comes down to a strategy with your menuing. So
Yeah, Ian and I had a short conversation yesterday. I thought what was really cool is while we were on that subject, the next thing that came out of his mouth, which I brought up earlier, is he's also putting a barrio dog type concept into, because of course the variety of like college and university, all the things he has to do.
Absolutely. I was like, there's always anti-trends, right? So it's like, let's go plant-based over here and let's do a hot dog concept over here. So, we got to do it all.
Yep, absolutely. So,
I had noticed that too, we're in in that same boat with regards to, we have, Beef O'Brady's that is definitely, like, again, fried food burgers. But we're starting to get a lot of feedback from our franchisee advisory council, from our brass tap side. And the brass tap side, like I mentioned, is a lot more geared towards millennials. Yeah. And we're going all the way now towards, we have places in California, Arizona, and Texas. So we have more people that are interested in not so much the plant-based items, but being plant-based forward in regards to, just like Keith and Ian were saying, fresh vegetables, what can we do with it? Can our bowls be turned in a little bit more pleasant or more eye appealing to those that want to just eat more of a veg as opposed to a protein? So it's there. Just like Ian said, for us, we sell maybe one Impossible Burger every other day. And people who are vegetarians that come in will just order vegetables that are from our bowls without protein. So it's the stuff is there. The encouragement from our franchisees are definitely there, but only for brass tap, not for Beef O'Brady's.
Yeah, that makes sense though. Beefs is a whole different concept. Yeah. So very cool. Any closing thoughts before we go to video? Because we're pretty much out of time now. Anything you want to say or add? I think this has been great, and I appreciate all the ideas and where things are going. Again, it's the first Tuesday of every month. We'll be doing that. This, webinar series will continue. And then we're going to bring in some, experts and specialists in certain areas as we go on. So if there's anything you really want as a theme for one of these webinars, be it a member or a sponsor, let us know, and be very open to looking at that and what we want to add into the calendar. Again, all of our calendar events are on our website, so please go there. Of course, the next thing coming up in March, we're going to Tampa, St. Pete, home of Vanessa. That place is really amazing now. It's changed so much over the years. So we're going to go there with GCIA. And then in April, we're going to Oaxaca, Mexico, which is going to be phenomenal for ICCA. May is our NRA reception. It's the 20th of May, and it's going to be at the Peninsula Hotel again. And then in June, we've got the 20th anniversary ICCA Summit in San Antonio, which that's another city that's changed so much. I hadn't been there in many years. And the past couple of trips we did, it's phenomenal. The restaurant scene there is just blown up. So, and then we've got a fall event for ICCA in Asheville, North Carolina. And finally, in October, GCIA, we're going to be in Nashville for the Culinary Combine. So thanks to everyone that was on the panel today. We really appreciate that. Thanks to Jack Lee, We appreciate everybody that was here to listen as well, all of our members and sponsors, and we look forward to an awesome year in 2023. So that being said, Mike, let's go to video.